I'm really excited to be sharing this fifth lesson on the Straight A Guide. As you recall, we started with defining success. That is the first step to overcoming a crisis. At least that's what I learned while going through 26 years in prison. You've got to define success about knowing what you want to achieve. Then you set goals, which we covered in the second lesson. And those goals have to align with how you define success. In fact, it's the goals that make it possible for you to determine whether you're making progress or not. The third lesson in the Straight A Guide is you've got to move forward with the right attitude. It all begins with the right attitude. You got to make that 100% commitment to success, not as I define it, not as your case manager defines it, not as your mom defines it, but as you defined it in lesson 1. That's why lesson 1 is the foundation for everything that follows. Then the next lesson, which we covered in the previous module, was about aspiring. You've got to aspire. You've got to see yourself doing something more than the crisis through which you're currently struggling. But all of that requires you to move into this lesson that we're talking about now, lesson number 5, which is action. You've got to take incremental action steps every single day that is moving you a little bit closer to the success that you want to become. And because I'm communicating for the purposes of prison professors courses to people who are going through the justice system, I want to reveal some of the lessons that I learned and how I use this concept to prepare for success while I was going through 9,500 days in prison. So because for me, success was going to be figuring out pathways that I could work toward reforming the system, I'd set these goals of getting an education, of contributing to society, of building a support network. And through that, I learned a great deal, particularly when I got to a high security penitentiary. See, I got my undergraduate degree in 1992 after I'd been incarcerated for about 4.5 years or so, because I did the first year in solitary. I got to the pen right away, got into the pathway of trying to build credentials, and that led to me getting an undergraduate. Then I continued advancing that ball with action steps to get into graduate school, because I believed that I would need more than a bachelor's degree if I wanted to seriously take a movement and become a force for bringing forward or at least influencing legislation such as the one that President Trump signed in 2018, which is the First Step Act. Obviously, I still want to do more, and I continue working to do more. But all of this was part of a long-term plan with incremental action steps. Now, there was a bit of a complication in graduate school because I was studying prisons and the people that they hold and sentencing and different things that I believed that we could do. And I did that by studying literature, but also by interviewing hundreds of people who were confined with me inside of the high security penitentiary. And I came across with this, belief that there are basically 2 reasons that people go back to prison. One of them is substance abuse. They have some type of complication with drugs or alcohol, and that leads them into a series of decisions that can completely disrupt their methodical, intentional plan. I knew I wasn't going to have a problem with drugs, but the second component that leads people back to prison was more of a complication, and that has to do with economic complications, right? If you can't get a job, if you can't find a way to get into the job market, there are problems, and those problems lead somebody to feel emasculated, feel as if he may not be doing enough, he may not be good enough to make it in society, and that leads to mental health complications, depression. It spirals people out of control. They start making decisions that expose them to more problems with the criminal justice system again. And I wanted to avoid that, and I know you want to avoid that. So 2 problems that you have to solve. One, don't have a problem with drugs. If you can't beat drugs while you're in prison, you're not going to beat it outside. And you know that leads you closer back into the system. If you hate prison as much as I hated prison, you are going to make sure that you're not involved with drugs or alcohol at any time. 2 is economic situation. I've started to really contemplate, hey, what are going to be the complications I face when I get out of prison? I believe that I would be unemployable. Nobody's ever going to hire me. Who's going to hire a guy who did 26 calendar years in prison and has never worked anywhere, doesn't have a career? So I knew I would have to find a way to create my own pathways to stability. And that's why I set another goal to take action while I was in prison. And that was to make sure that when I got out of prison, I would have enough money in the bank to last an entire year, regardless if I got a job or not. Because, if you get out of prison and you don't have economic conditions resolved, well, you're effectively in another prison, because you've got to take a mediocre job that might be a dead-end job, no pathway for advancement. And in that job, now you've got supervised release breathing down your neck. They won't let you leave that job until you get another job, but it's very hard. I just anticipated it's going to be very hard to get a job while I'm incarcerated. So I had to be thinking and thinking and thinking and then taking action. So because I had spent the first several years of my imprisonment working to develop academic credentials and writing skills, an opportunity opened for me to become a published author, which was one of the core goals that I had set. Remember, get an education, contribute to society by publishing, and 3, building a strong support network. And they all work together. So the complication that I had is I was under a different sentencing scheme than everybody today. In the sentencing scheme I was under, called the old law, I had a 45-year sentence, but I could satisfy that sentence in 26 years, provided I did not get a disciplinary infraction. If you get a disciplinary infraction under the sentencing scheme that I was sentenced under, they could take years away in these good time credits. So I didn't want to get a disciplinary infraction. So I had to take action because I wanted to solve my book problem, my income problem. I wanted to make sure I got out of prison with enough money in the bank to live a year, but I didn't want to get a disciplinary infraction. So that all ties back to defining success, right? I wanted to get out of prison at the soonest possible time with my dignity intact and with opportunities to live a life of meaning and relevance and dignity. And for me, what that meant was I wanted to work to change the system so that people like you could earn freedom through merit. Through the harder you work, the more freedom would open. So I had to take a series of action steps to make sure I didn't get a disciplinary infraction. And as I wrote in Earning Freedom, that required me working with, asking the captain if I could get permission, eventually getting a letter from the regional office that provided permission for me to write books so long as I wasn't getting paid. So what I could do is I could assign the royalties for the books that I wrote to my family member, first to my sister, and then later to my wife, Kara. But because I had that letter in my file, I was able to move forward with my plan without the fear of having my losing good time while I was in prison. And through that path, through that series of action steps, I started to execute the plan. I got my education as a self-evidenced by getting a bachelor's degree from Mercer University, which I got in 1992, earning a master's degree from Hofstra University in 1995, and becoming a published author that allowed publishers to provide a revenue stream, first to my sister, then to my wife, that got put into an account that I later used to grow through investments in the stock market, that allowed me to walk out of prison with more than $100,000 in liquid assets when I got out of prison. Sometimes I would joke that I'm one of the only guys that I know that had to take a pay cut when he got out of prison, because I was doing so well in prison, primarily because it's a low cost of living while you're in there, but also because I was able to earn a living and then use the knowledge that I had gained while I was in prison to understand investments and let those investments grow over time. Sometimes I told you, as you'll learn in the last module of this course, is you've got to be grateful. You've got to have appreciation for the blessings that come your way. I had many blessings while going through 9,500 days in prison, one of them being the blessing of compounding interest. Because the longer I could let those assets grow, the more valuable they would become as weeks turned into months, months turned into years, and years turned into decades. In fact, it allowed me to support my wife, when I'll talk about that in the next module or one of the next lessons, about how I got married in prison. So you see, it's all these incremental little steps. action steps that put you on the pathway to higher levels of success, to more and more opportunity. And that's what I want for every one of you. But notice that in the straight A guide, I'm always documenting my story. And that's what I would encourage you to do by opening a profile at prisonprofessors.org. It's 100% free. Just have your family, or if you've got access to the internet, or your family does, go to prisonprofessors.org, click profiles, open a profile, and start building your biography, writing your journal entries, writing your book reports, doing your release plan. All of these are the little steps that will lead you to a higher level of liberty at the soonest possible time, or at least make you a better candidate for the highest level of liberty at the soonest possible time. That's what I'm looking for people in our community to be thinking about. My name is Michael Santos. I'm the founder of Prison Professors. I believe in you.